Today's video is all about dissonance and how to introduce it into chords. And dissonance can make your chords extra pretty. Or it can make your chords extra gnarly and nasty. So what's the best way to start understanding how to add this dissonance and how it's appropriate and how to use it with different chords? I think the most important thing is to start understanding where intervals are close to each other in key or close to each other in a single chord. So there's two different contexts here. First of all, we'll look at in key, and this is mostly how you can get the pretty dissonance, the beautiful dissonance into your chords. So we're looking at key of C major here, and the first instance is thinking about how to add fourths to the chords. So you'll see each of these say 11, 11, 11, but 11s are really just fourths, and in this case they really are fourths. I'm not entirely sure if this is the best way to name these chords. Maybe add 4 is a better way to think about these chords. But still, I've just called them 11 for the sake of it, because they could easily substitute a major 11, a minor 11, or a G11. It will give you a similar color, but it's just in the same register as the third in each case. So what's actually going on here is you're thinking of a C major 7. So a C major 7 like this, drop 2 voicing. So that's a C major 7. And we're going to think about all the different chords in this key. So that's chord 1 in the key of C major. It's going root, in this case, not what's on the board. This is root 5th, major 7th, major 3rd, and then another 5th on top. And if we exploit either the semitones or the tones, like distance intervals between notes in the key, then this is where we can introduce that dissonance. So chord number 1, if we rearrange this, I'm going to think about fourths first of all. So the first thing to identify is where is the third. So the third is here. It's like 1, 2, 3 from a major scale, and then it's up an octave in the chord. And then dissonance can be exploited when you've got two notes, a semitone or a tone apart. So in this case, the first scale or the first mode of this key, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the major third and the perfect fourth are a semitone apart. So if we think about this in terms of something we can exploit, if we play those two notes together, then you do get really heavy dissonance. If they're on their own, it sounds more dissonant than when they are in a chord. So it's all about context, really. So if we take that third, we're basically trying to find this interval to be able to play at the same time and then put it into the chord. So here is the third, and there's the fourth. And again, it sounds really tense on its own. It's like students of mine used to call them panic chords. It seems to be really popular in metal music and stuff like that. But when you add that to the rest of a chord, or you add some extra context to root the chord or pin the chord down, then let's say we put in the root, the major 7th, and they already have a dissonance, even though they're an octave apart or nearly an octave apart, because if you were to take that 7th and the root and put them in the same register, then they have that same, it's like a minor second dissonance, semitone dissonance, but they're nearly an octave apart. They still have dissonance though, especially when they're just played on their own. As soon as you add a third to that, so the third's here, it softens the whole thing and makes it kind of pretty. But then you can add more dissonance still if you play that with your second, third, second, third, fourth finger, and that leaves your first finger free. It's a bit of a stretch, but you would get used to it eventually. It feels quite comfortable to me. Then you've got this major 11 sound, or major add 4, however you want to see it. And it's quite pretty. And you've just added an extra colour to this chord. Players like Bill Frisell talk a lot about colours when they're talking about intervals and adding things to chords. So I think this is something that he does a lot. He looks to exploit the second interval dissonance. So that can be, in some cases, it's a minor second like this. But if we move to the next chord in key, so this is D minor 11 or D minor add 4, then if you look at the Dorian mode, this is a really good reason to learn all your modes. It means you can exploit this a lot quicker and find these things quicker. If you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll notice that the third, the minor third, and the fourth, they're a tone apart this time, so that's the same as playing this, which is still dissonant, but it's not as dissonant as a minor second interval. So that's a major second interval, also known as a tone. Minor second interval, also known as a semitone. So now we're going to add the important things about this chord. If it's a minor 7 chord that we're adding to, then we need the root and the flat 7. And of course we need the minor third. And then we get the dissonance with the major second against the minor third. Sorry, the perfect fourth against the minor third. And a pattern starts to emerge, so you can practice these things and get used to how they fall within keys. So you can play chord 1, C major 11 or C add 4, and then chord 2, D minor 11. So that's adding the fourth to the minor 7 chord, or the 11th. I should explain that an 11th is the same as a 4 because you've only got 7 notes in any diatonic mode here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it repeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is the same as 1, 2, 3, 4 up here. But if we were to count right through it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, that's why we call it an 11th, because it says something about what the composer wants. It's in the upper octave. So following that pattern through, C major 11, and then D minor 11. If we look at the next chord should have a perfect fourth as well as a minor third too, because chord 3 is minor. So it's the same shape, just up a tone. Now, chord 4 in any key, if you're using 7th chords, will be a major 7. So it's the same as going 1, 2, 3, 4. But the fourth of chord 4, if you know much about modes, is sharpened because it's a Lydian mode. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You can hear it's got that kind of sci-fi thing about it. It's a little bit not what you're used to from a standard major scale. So instead of that, you can hear that that doesn't work in the context of what we set up in your ears. It needs a sharpened fourth. So what was a fourth there should become a sharpened fourth here. And right enough, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's that 11th there, sharp 11. So now we've got, I didn't map that one up, but it's basically an F major 7 with a sharp 11 added. So now you can hear that all these things go together. Chord 3, chord 4. Now chord 5 is really interesting because it's got a flat 7, but the third and the fourth are a semitone apart as they were in the first chord. So instead of root major 7, we need root flattened 7 because chord 5 is a dominant chord. But then we've got the same thing as chord 1 with the major third and the perfect fourth. together like that. So you get this sound, which is, it kind of makes a tens chord more pretty, I think, which is really interesting. So follow that all the way up. You've got chord 1. We're just adding 11s to all of these. Chord 2, chord 3, chord 4, chord 5, chord 6. Now chord 7 should be half diminished, but because we're not using fifths in these chords, you may have noticed so far there's no fifth, it'll be the same as chord 6. And then back to chord 1 again. So now you can really hear the context of all this. And even though there's so much dissonance in all these chords, it sounds really pretty and like it belongs in key, because you're only using material from the key, you're only using material from the major scale that all the chords are built on. And you can do this with lots of different intervals, wherever you can exploit a tone or a semitone, and that's all that major scales are made up of, is tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. So you can add any interval and put it in the same register as another interval, play those intervals together in the chord, and it will give you some kind of pretty dissonance. So you could do the same thing with sixths, and again I've named them 13ths, but I'm not sure if add 6 is maybe a better way to describe these, especially because they're in the register that they are. But if you do that with chord 1, instead of adding a fourth to things, we're adding a 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've played it up there instead of here because that's where we're going to put it logically to go in our chord. So now we've got root, 3rd, 7th, and we're going to add that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This time it's a major second interval, so it's not that dissonant. But you can hear it's really pretty. The next one's really nice and dissonant because it's a minor second interval. If you think about Dorian, Dorian is a minor scale with a major 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we take a minor 7 chord, and what would be the 5th normally, we'll extend that to the 6th. So you get the major 6 and the flat 7 beating against each other. So like, but you put that into a minor 7 chord and it softens it in context. The next one's interesting because it's Phrygian, and what you're doing basically is you're kind of making an inversion of a C major 9. So you could see these as substitutions for other chords, just like you can with chords in key generally. But this time you've got a flat 6, so if we think about Phrygian, 1, major second, no, Phrygian, flat second, minor 3rd, 4th, perfect 5th, flat 6, so now if we take a minor 7 chord, the E minor 7 in key, and we put that flat 6 in, that's a really pretty chord. But it could just as easily be like a C major 9 if we put a C, on the bass there, then you've got a really pretty sort of suspended chord. So they can work in place of each other. So that is E minor with an added flat 6. Not sure how you would name that chord. You might just name it as an inversion of C sus2. And then chord 4 will be the same as chord 1, because the 6 is the same in both chord 4 and chord 1, and they are the same major 7 chord. So chord 5 gets really interesting because you've got a major 6 against a flattened 7th, so they are a semitone apart, and it's got a major 3rd in it as opposed to our Dorian chord which had the minor 3rd, so you get this for a dominant chord, which is really quite mysterious. it maybe adds more tension to the dominant chord rather than less, like when we added the fourths. Chord 6 will be the same as chord 3. And then chord 7 will be super weird. Oh no, it won't. It will be the same as chord, will it? Yeah, it'll be the same as chord, I'm going to put it down an octave because it's hard to cram it in there. It'll be the same as chord 3 and chord 5. Chord 3 and chord 6. And then back to chord 1. So now you've got all of this in context, so like chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, chord 4, chord 5, chord 6, chord 7 down an octave, chord 1. And you can keep doing this with different intervals. One that's really widely used is major add 9 and minor add 9. So here is the add 9 stuff. Here is C add 9. Now this one's a bit of a pain to play. So that's just a C major with an added ninth in there. So you've got a tone dissonance between the second or the ninth, however you want to see it, and the major third. But then it gets more interesting when you move on to chord 2 because you have a major second against a minor third, so they're a semitone apart. It's a bit of a murder mystery chord. Chord 3 is Phrygian, so it'll have a flat 9, so you get this effect. It'll be a tone dissonance in a minor chord. And you can keep going through the key with that. You probably recognize those chords from like Every Breath You Take. Don't know if I'm in the right key, but that's just major add 9 stuff. And then chord 2, or the second chord in that chord progression, is a minor add 9. So these things are quite widely used in pop and rock music because they are both pretty and dissonant at the same time. They have an interesting sound. One other thing that you can do is just play major 7 voicings where you have a second instance of the root that's a semitone away from the 7th. So in this case, C major 7, root, major 3rd, major 7th, and then a root up the top. So the major 7th and the root, if you think about it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. So those two together create that dissonance, and then you have that when it's a chord. And you can keep going through the key with that. You can play minor 7s like that. So like root, flat 3rd, flat 7, and then the root up an octave. Chord 3. Chord 4 is same as chord 1. Major root, major 3rd, 7th, root again. And then chord 5, dominant. And chord 6 and chord 7 will be the same as each other again because there's no fifth. And then you've got chord 1 again. Whoa. So yeah, exploiting dissonance for pretty chords. That's for making more interest and more colour in your chord progressions when you want them to be consonant and together and more beautiful and pretty. But you can also exploit these dissonances within tense chords. So the first thing that comes to mind is the likes of a Hendrix chord. If you think about a Hendrix chord, it's a 7 sharp 9 chord. So it's basically root, 3rd, flat 7, sharp 9. So a sharp 9 is actually the same thing as a minor 3rd to all intents and purposes here when there's no context. So those two notes, the 3rd and the sharp 9, are a semitone apart. You can hear that there's a dissonance there. You could hear it even more if you take that major 3rd. So we're talking about the Hendrix thing. If you take the third and put it up an octave, and then play it with that chord. That's quite hard to play, but you could just use the E on the bottom. Then you can make that Hendrix chord more dissonant because you've got the sharp 9 and the major third, a semitone apart now, with a flat 7. So add the flat 7, and then add the root on an open string. So you can actually make these dissonant chords more dissonant still, basically. The video that I cut to at the beginning of my band Globe Music, we're essentially doing that in the key of A. So like an A7 sharp 9. Is it an A7? Oh, actually no, it's not. So what we're doing is we're playing like a sort of major minor thing. No, it's a similar chord. So we've got the root twice, and then we're just exploiting that dissonance between, let's call it a minor third and a major third because it's easier to understand. So like you've got A minor, so there's the note that makes it sad, the minor third, and you've got A major, there's the note that makes it happy. Let's confuse the hell out of the listener and make the chord really gnarly and have the happy note and the sad note together with an octave up. And then you can have an open root here. The hard thing about these chords is sometimes they are really hard to play because the stretches are so far because of these intervals. So you can make these kind of chords using open notes. And then, and then you can move between. So you can change these chords. You can make that like a minor thing with a flat 5 in it, but if you put the root on the sharp, on the F sharp. So with that root, the context is completely different. Now that's a sharp 4, like 1, 2, 3, 4, sharp 4, with a 5th and a minor third. So it's like playing F sharp minor, but you're adding, and you're putting the third up the top. So you can get some really gnarly chords using these principles. Any other things that we could talk about? Another thing is you can use several of them together. You can use several of these dissonances together. The good question is, what is the most dissonant chord you can possibly produce on a guitar? I think the best I've come up with so far, exploiting the dissonances, is using as many open notes as you can, because that's the only way you're going to get several of them at the same time. So if you think about it, all your notes, all your open strings tuned to the 5th fret or the 4th fret of fretted strings. So if you lower that or raise it by a semitone, then you're going to get that dissonance. You can do that, so you can have those two together, then you can have these two together, and you can have these two together. So I think that's about the most dissonant chord I can possibly come up with on a guitar, and it's absolutely stinking. Absolute horror chord. Let's make it gnarlier still. Bridge pickup. So if you're writing some horror film music or some horror video game music, there's the chord for you. You can get almost as dissonant a chord if you slide that up a tone, because now you've got dissonance up there between those two and between those two. Actually, it's just as dissonant because each one is still a semitone dissonance. So if you want to create some tension in a composition, you can have. Absolutely stinking and fantastic. Another thing that you can think about is if you use chords from a different scale or a different scale set. So thinking about either melodic or harmonic minor, you can do things like, let's say you're in A harmonic minor. The notes of that scale: root, second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and flat sixth, major seventh, and back to the root again. Now, obviously something to exploit there would be the relationship between the A root and the major seventh in that, but you can have that one minor third now and make it kind of terrifying. So nice and creepy stuff. And there's lots of opportunities for that in different chord and key sets. If you think about maybe chord 4 of melodic minor is Lydian dominant, and the first thing that springs to mind there is it's a dominant chord with a sharp 4, and you could have a perfect fifth in the same chord. An easy way to achieve that is, so here's the Lydian dominant chord. So it's a A7 sharp 11. So root, flat 7, major third, and sharp 4, so sharp 11. And it's the Simpsons sound. You can get the same, you can do that Simpsons thing with but to add the extra tension to that chord, to this 7 sharp 11 chord, you can just have the fifth of the scale. So like it's coming from a Lydian dominant scale, so 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, fifth, 6, flat 7. It's coming from that scale. The sharp 4 and the fifth are a semitone apart, so you can exploit that by using the open E string because we're perfectly positioned for it. So there's the sharp 11, there's the E, the fifth, so we can use the top string for that. So we could be like, to add that extra tension to that chord. Which is interesting too. So there's a number of different ways to do it, both with pretty chords and tens chords. Hopefully this is a good introduction to get you started with that if it's something you haven't thought about already. If you enjoyed what you saw today, then if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and hit like if you liked it. And I will see you next time. Bye bye.